My name is Justin Elcock. I was also a student in this class. I was focusing on, I was part of the Beta Bay group. So for the street on Beta Bay, when I was walking through the street, I've always liked Beta Bay, but I was walking through the street again when we were analyzing it, I realized that the street was lacking in like the love for the pedestrian. So like it's a really high commercial street with lots of little businesses, and it's a nice street to drive on. But when you're walking the street, it's not very pleasant because Florida is hot majority of the year. There's no shading. It has these vast urban expanses because like the buildings aren't necessarily tall, but because the street is 4 lanes and they're like technically very wide lanes, it creates this wide concrete expanse. It doesn't feel very natural or comfortable to someone who's walking down the street, especially if there's no shading because the concrete absorbs the heat. So I was thinking of something that would like make the street more comfortable for the walking pedestrians, as well as bring more vitality to the street because no one really goes to Beta Bay just because, or like for anything outside of business or a small a small time food gathering like to go out to lunch because there's not much to do there outside of those two things, small business and food. So I was thinking about proposals that like I was analyzing those particular aspects of the street as well as thinking of proposals that may help that. So I think that's my presentations for the beginning. So if I can go forward. Uh, so the first thing I did was a site visit of Beta Bay. Oh, this is blocking it. Okay, sorry, the thing was blocking half my page, but I can still make it out. So for my site visit of Beta Bay, I looked at safety, walkability, sidewalk, and driver behavior, among other things. There's different analyses and different points that I wrote down, but to put it in a summary, the sidewalks I felt were very narrow because when I walked on Beta Bay, I have an arm span of like 5 feet, and my arm, if I stretched my arms all the way out, my finger would hang in the street volume. So a car could technically hit my hand if I stretched all the way out, which is not a good thing if you're walking the street because there's no barrier. And then like whenever cars are going down the street, especially trucks, since the lane is so wide, people feel humans are more inclined to drive faster when there's more space, which creates more like air resistance, especially for the pedestrians. So that there's this, you can still walk the street, but it doesn't have as much comfort as other streets would, especially since there's no barrier. So like the car is passing like right next to you. If you walk too close to the curb, the side mirror might hit you, which will not be fun. So I thought that was a safety concern as well as a sidewalk concern. The driver behavior, it goes back to the same wide lanes because people drive faster in wider lanes. And the walkability also suffers because of those previous things that I mentioned. Oh. The comfort appeal and the porosity, as well as crossing street intersections. Um, for the comfort and appeal, I think that goes back to the previous page. Like the safety was also suffering because of the same points that I already mentioned. The porosity, there's very little greenery on that street because outside of the image that I just showed on my previous page, there was not really much greenery on that street with grass and trees. There's hardly any trees on the street except for when you go to the west side by Dale Mabry, where all the residents would be living. On the east side, especially towards McDill, there's like no trees at all. The crossing street intersections, that was more of a tally I did when I was on the street. When I saw it, I would realize there's very little bicyclists because there's no bicycle lane, I don't believe, as well as people walking on the street. Most people will be walking at average speed or higher, is something I noticed. No one was really taking a stroll, which probably is a subliminal factor, which goes back to the same no porosity and no tree awning, no awning. There's no awnings on the buildings either because none of the buildings have shading that protect the pedestrian. So it's just uncomfortable to walk through, especially in the afternoon sun in Florida. I also did Main Street, but that's not part of my presentation for today. So for my street analysis for Beta Bay, I wrote down the same points I mentioned, but I wrote it out where the sidewalks are too narrow, barely enough for two pedestrians to walk side by side at all. The street lights, I have also noticed the cabling and the utilities of the street are a little bit, how do I put this? I guess they're kind of in the way because they get entangled in the trees and then it kind of they're placed in ways that create obstruction. So especially the sidewalks are already narrow enough, so you can't afford to lose any of that square footage. That's something I noticed. And then there's no separation or privacy between the street and the sidewalk, even by the residential area. Like people who live there on the street, their sidewalk is the street. So people who are walking on the street literally walk past their cars. There's no privacy per se from the sidewalk to their house, which I think could be changed. And a lot of those have no awning, so that goes back to my previous point about no shade, no thermal comfort for the person who's walking across the street. I also did these two mappings, the bus map and the points of interest map. For the bus map, I was analyzing the two buses that go across Bay to Bay, which would be the number 360 LX and the number 36 for the Heart buses. 360 comes across the highway before going west, and the 36 goes north to south on Dale Mabry to the west side. The bus stops are kind of spread out, like every other block, coming from the east to the west side, and then there is uh, a large conglomeration of them on the Dale Mabry. Once you get to Dale Mabry, that intersection, and then going north to south, because there's more activity on Dale Mabry itself, so the bus stops become a lot more frequent over there. And on the points of interest map, I'm not sure this is in the way, so I'm gonna try to move it. Okay. So for the points of interest map, I was looking at where anything could be of interest to the passerby outside of business. So on the west side of Bay to Bay, it's all residential, so there's none of that. Most of it's on the east side, and it gets more concentrated on the intersection of Bay to Bay and MacDill, where there's actually a lot more food places than there are small retail stores. There's some businesses there, but there's not much retail stores as they are. Actually, I take that back. Sorry. There's not much business there as there are small retail. So it would be a combination of those, and then most of the restaurants they had alcohol sales, and um, it was more of it was more food than anything else in that area. And if I go forward, my existing street sections, I was just analyzing diagrammatically how the streets would look. So I'm gonna put this here for now. Wait, okay, I'm gonna put this here for now. So for Bay to Bay, I did the residential area of Sterling and Bay to Bay, which shows how the residential area looks in that particular portion of the street with the street dimensions and another section, as well as the next conjunction by Bay to Bay and Concordia, which is a more upscale intersection because not all of the businesses in Bay to Bay were recently built, but this area was more recently built, so it had a more upscale feel to it, with a food mart nearby, and then other upscale restaurants there next to the Starbucks and in that vicinity. And then I also did the intersection of MacDill and Granada Street, as well as MacDill and Barcelona Street. And both those intersections were very highly commercial. There was many businesses there. Next to a power plant that was on the east side, was shown by the yellow ground that they have there because it was a sandy patch. That was my analysis of the streets on that end. And then going forward, I made two proposals. This is my proposal. I made two proposals for two different locations. One proposal for two different locations. Sorry. So okay, this is perfect. So I have the Bay to Bay proposal, and I have three-dimensionally, and I have an existing. So for my Bay to Bay, I was introducing urban greenery throughout the recreational zone because as it goes back to my preliminary point about there being an urban expanse, I thought it'd be both visual aesthetic as well as a physical barrier for people who are walking the street, which I think would like make it better for everyone. And I took my influences from Bayshore kind of. So I put a central greenery island that goes throughout the street because Bay is already a very wide street. So I'm actually going into this street width because I didn't want to take away from the own lots of people on either side of the street. So I took away from some of the street widths, which still leaves enough space for two lanes on both sides. And my specific proposal was between Bay to Bay and Concordia, a little bit east of that, between this and this lot that was owned. It's actually owned by a restaurant that's been there. I believe it's a family restaurant that's been there for several decades. I looked up their account on the appraiser website. The land is actually fairly cheap compared to neighboring lands, but like they don't use it at all. Actually, that land is only used for garbage because they only have dumpsters there, and there's really no parking. All the parking is in front the mart, the food mart that's to the west side. So I believe to replace the dumpsters with this green zone that's like an exterior, a shaded exterior recreational zone where there could be seating. It's next to the food mart. It's between the food mart and a restaurant. So I believe it'd be a good. I changed the parking to be angled in front of food mart because they have a lot of. I'm not sure why, but they have a lot of concrete there. But like there was way too much space to drive, so it felt like the space was not being properly utilized. So I shifted it, so instead of having it perpendicular to the food mart, I made it parallel to the food mart. I made it angled so people can drive in from the side and then come back out. And I added more greenery, goes back to the same aesthetic and the shading. And I added seating there for eating as well as 2 ping-pong tables because I wanted some kind of recreational activity for people to use in the street. And ping pong was one of the easiest ways to get people to do something because like whenever you introduce an urban program, especially a recreational one, you have to give a specific program for people to use it. Otherwise, they're not going to do anything with it. So I give ping pong tables because they're easy to make. You can make a simple table, and then people could bring their own balls and paddles and they could play there. And then I think it'll also be good for the restaurant because the people have somewhere to eat outside because they already have outdoor seating, and they have more. That there's nothing wrong with that, as well as if there's more shading in that area, and then there's ping pong outside, people could play and eat and go back. And I think it'd be good business for the restaurant owners because it would bring more traffic to their to their eatery location. So I thought it'd be a good benefit for all parties in that aspect for that proposal. And then for my next proposal, this is this is my corner of Bay to Bay McDill. Technically, it's under the freeway, so it's actually this is the existing under the freeway. And then I just removed the freeway so people could see it better. There is a large parking lot that's underneath the freeway that I don't know if it needs to be there because there's parking to the south side and then there's more parking behind it. So I took out behind the structural pillars or the piles that are to this side. So I proposed creating a cafe, a small cafe that is under the highway. And I can't put large trees there because the space I believe is only 19 feet high. So I'm thinking of adding shrubbery to that area as well as much greenery and lots of seating for the cafe as well as there's a bus intersection about a couple seconds away from this spot on the intersection. So I thought it'd be a nice place to relax before walking to the bus and catching your bus, since the Heart Bus has an app and you can track where the bus is coming. So it's more comfortable because not many bus stops actually. I didn't mention this earlier, but not many bus stops in that area have shading. They're mostly just the metal pole with the sign on the side of the sidewalk. So I thought this would give them a place to relax before walking to their bus stop because I feel like there's gonna be a lot of people catching the bus in that vicinity. So I thought this would be a nice R&R zone for the people that are there. It has the shaded area, some seating, fixed seating, and then some kind of movable seating for the cafe because the most comfortable chairs are the ones you can usually move. If you look at other urban setups by other communities, they have the chairs that are movable are often the ones that are most liked because there's 101 different ways to sit in a chair, and people in general just like to move around their chairs. So it brings more comfortability to the people that are there who are also going to the small cafe. And that's my last slide. So I guess that's my presentation for today.